Well, hello, and welcome back. So we are now live. Oh, let me get that out of the way. And the topic tonight is Markdown. Just so you know, I do have the YouTube and Facebook comments open on the other screen, so I'll be switching to those and checking them out. So if you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to make them. One second. I'm going to try to drag them over and see if I can fit all this stuff on one screen here. It's a little tough, but we'll see what we can do, because I really do want to make sure that if you got any comments or questions that I am here to take them for you. So I prefer it if you do the questions on YouTube. There's a link to that in the description, or at least there should be. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to bring over, I'm going to bring over my little Markdown cheat sheet here. I'm going to use this as our talking point. Well, so in case you haven't heard of Markdown, hopefully you have. It's a plain text format for creating HTML. So basically you can use this to create websites, but more than that, you can use it to create a resume, you can use it to create your GitHub profile. That's what you have to use, in fact. You can use it for documentation for code that you write. In fact, a lot of documentation generators have Markdown included as part of the formatting. So Rust documentation has that, for example. And when I say that it's a plain text format, what I mean is that it is a format that you could type in a text message on a phone. So just a real quick illustration of the difference between plain text and rich text. If I go to Google Drive and I open up a new document, basically anything that you can't type on a phone is what we call rich text. So we're going to take this example here. Here are some words, blah, blah. Now, I can go in and I can select and I can make something bold, or I can make it italics, or I can change the font, if I can get this out of the way there. So we can change the font and we can change the size. Now, none of this is stuff that you can do in a text message. You can send emojis and you can send different characters, but you can't send styles of text. So that's the difference between plain text and rich text. And more so, this is plain text in that this is the kind of thing that you would use, say, to write an email. So I'll show you an example of it. This is my Markdown cheat sheet. You should see a description in the comments. You should see this, or excuse me, in the description for the video, you should see this. I'm going to go ahead and post it in the comments on YouTube as well, just so that you can follow along. Oh, I can't post it in the comments on YouTube. I'll post it in the chat on YouTube and in the comments on Facebook so that you have this in front of you, but it should be in the description as well. So what Markdown looks like is what we see here. I meant to go back. Here we are. This is my Markdown cheat sheet. Markdown is when you use things like asterisks, underscores, backticks, tildes, to be able to format text. So if you put asterisks around something, it becomes bold. If you put underscores around it, it becomes italic. If you put backticks, it becomes code, and so on. So when you are taking notes, I've talked multiple times about taking notes, and you're on gist.github.com, I talked about how you can have your file name. This is just the same thing as if I had created this from scratch here. beyondcodenotes.md. MD stands for Markdown. It lets GitHub know that you want to treat this not just as pure plain text, but you want it to apply Markdown styling to it. So if I go in here and I add some asterisks around this, you can see in the editor, it's adding bold to it. And if I hit update, now we can see that I've got bold on there. Now there's three main things that you're dealing with in Markdown. It's rather limited in what it does, but you can create some great stuff. For example, most of this sheet right here that we're looking at was created in Markdown. So as we go down the list here, this is all of Markdown. Everything that there is to know about it is right here. And most of it is just permutations of the same thing. There's not a whole lot of new content as we go down. We're just looking at the same thing with slight variations to give examples. Really, right up here at the top, this cheat sheet, this is essentially very close to 100% of Markdown. The other stuff is just extra examples with exceptions. So in this, you have three kind of things. You have text, meaning paragraphs, quotes, minor styling. You've got tables, as you can see here. This is a table. And you have code blocks, which is what we see when we look at, well, let's just see, where do we have a code block? And this one you can't really tell that it's a code block very much because it is already styled. So it's inside of the table. Okay, this is a better example of a code block. So code block, you have multiple ticks rather than just one, and then the name of the language like JavaScript or Go or Rust or MD for Markdown, TXT, whatever. And then it comes out and it highlights it and colors it appropriately depending on what Markdown program you're using. So we can create websites with this and they can look pretty decent. So your notes that you're creating are basically going to be your first website. I want you to think of this as essentially a blog entry. You're going to take notes, you're going to format your notes, and the exercise for this is to actually test out what we're going over here. So your notes should be basically how to make notes in Markdown, and you should end up with something that is a little bit like this. Now, one thing that I do want to mention right off the bat, it's very natural to do lists. So I'm going to go back over here to my Google Doc. This is the kind of thing that we do in email and on phones and in Slack messages and Discord messages, all of these places that are not rich text editors. You'll do something like put a hyphen or an asterisk and space, and then you'll type out, this is a list. This is still a list. Oranges, apples, bananas. Whoops, that needs an S there. There we go. So you're very used to making lists just offhandedly in these different programs that you've already been using. In essence, you've already been using Markdown because you have been using, where did my list go? Let me get back to my big list of all the, oh, here it is. So who supports Markdown? If you're using GitHub, you've already been using Markdown. Dropbox Paper, Stack Overflow, Discord, Facebook Messenger, Reddit, YouTube, Slack. If you have used asterisks to bold something or a hyphen to make a list, or you've noticed that you put some sort of syntax around something that you're typing, you've been using Markdown. It's just maybe you haven't been using all of it. So with that said, getting back to why I was talking about the lists, there's a temptation to overuse lists because you can have a list and you can have a sublist, and we can say these are all fruits and we can indent them. And there'll be a temptation to do a little bit of list mania. I will challenge you when you're doing lists. I'd say anytime you think you need a list, start out with a table instead, and then work back to a list if you're sure it really needs to be a list, because quite often you'll find that things look much nicer when you use table syntax. Now, we haven't talked about what all these syntaxes are. We're about to go over that right now. But I just kind of wanted to give you an overview so you can see what it looks like. And then what this is building up to is we want to be able to have a blog that's written in Markdown on our server. So the notes that you're keeping each day and Markdown files, we're actually going to download those later on, either tomorrow or Saturday. And we're going to convert them with a tool called ComRack, which I think is mentioned in the description here. And I'll show you how to install that later. We'll do a little demo with it that will convert the Markdown that you write that looks like these items on the left here, these items, into things that look like the items on the right here. Basically makes it look like it does the translation of whatever you type in your notes, that you get back the same formatting. So that tool is called ComRack, and we'll get into that in just a second. So I want to spend a minute going over the basics and then the advanced stuff, and that'll be both minutes all spent. Also, I'm going to check real quick in the comments, see if we've got anybody asking any questions. All right. I don't see any questions coming in. All right. So we already talked about double asterisks will give you bold. You can also use double asterisks in the middle of a word to bold part of the word. It's very common in programming. This is another great reason to learn Markdown, is it's a very smooth introduction to scripting and programming. You learn some syntax concepts that are fairly common across many different languages. If you wanted to actually show an asterisk, you might need to put a backslash. So let me explain the difference between backslash and forward slash. URL, this is a normal slash, regular everyday slash, forward slash, regular slash. What you see in URL, those are slashes. Backslash is the opposite direction. So you can think of it that way. Backslash is a common escape character, meaning that you can put a backslash in front of something, and if it would normally trigger a behavior, it will cause it to instead to not trigger that behavior. And that's exactly what is happening here. So then we have the italics. Italics can be done with single asterisks or underscores, but italics or the underscores will not convert in the middle of a word, because an underscore is actually considered a word character, and this has to relate to programming languages. In most programming languages, an underscore is the substitute for a space. When you have to name something while you're programming, you can't use a space in the name most of the time, or if you can, it's very cumbersome. Like, for example, you might have to use a backslash or use some sort of quoting system. And so traditionally, the underscore is used for names of variables in coding. And that is why the underscore is considered a word character, and it will not necessarily, well, it should not be interpreted as something italics in the middle of a word or a phrase. Then if you want to have both italics and bold, you can use triple. The tilde is a strike through, and you can see those examples here. The inline code is single backticks. So this is not creating a block of code, but if you just want to highlight something, like you can see here in this inline, it gives something a code feel. It uses a different font. It uses some shading on there. And then you can combine all of these together or none of these together to escape them. So see what I was saying here? Basically, we're looking at the exact same thing over and over again. I'm just demonstrating all the edge cases. So every way that you would ever use Markdown is represented in this document, and all of the permutations, essentially. So when you have a paragraph of text, you just use a double space to create a paragraph. So let me go back over here to the notes real quick. And if I put some text Oops. Oh, looks like we might have to restart that. I don't know. Is anybody watching can tell me how long the stream was in the wrong spot there? Oops. Give me just a second. I'm going to try to figure out. Okay. When did I hit that key by mistake? Sorry for the delay here. So we're talking about block formatting. All right, I just shown the list. And then we didn't have anything until just a moment ago. So sorry about that, folks. Might have to redo this before I save it for good. But I'll try to continue off. Actually, I'm just going to pause the stream for a second. I'm going to let it keep rolling. But I'm going to put up... I'm going to pause the stream for a second, figure out where we left off, and try to continue from there. So if you can bear with me for just a minute, I'll be right back. And then when we edit this, I'll just cinch those together. And we're back. Sorry about that interruption. So I'm caught up with where we were, and I fixed the problem that cause the stream to stop. So I think where we were at was I was just showing in here that if we write some text like this, some text on one line, more text on another line, this will actually, when it converts, will go on the same line. Whereas if we have two spaces, that becomes a separate paragraph. So you can see that here. Now let me get this back to where we were. We have lots of different list styles we can do. And then I think where we were about to go was talking about tables. So one thing that I want to mention is that you can put HTML inside of Markdown, but you cannot put Markdown inside of HTML. So I'll show you what I mean here with this table. First of all, the table is hopefully very simple looking, and if, oh, we need to get over to put that up there for you. Sorry. All right. Let me bring my keyboard up close. The key that I want you to recognize is right above the return key there. That is the pipe key. So this is one of those keys that you may have never used before, but it's very useful for formatting, and we use it for various things in programming. So that pipe key is how you create the lines in a table, and then you've got hyphens. And you don't need to worry about these colons here. They just define whether something is left aligned or right aligned or center aligned. You don't need to remember that. I just have it there again for reference. It's an option that you have that you can use. And as we go down, you can see that on this last line, I've actually inserted some HTML. So HTML has the angle brackets on either side. And when we have it inside of Markdown, it will do its proper job. So a BR tag is what this is considered. When we have an opening caret and a closing caret and some words, that is a tag. So this BR tag is doing its function. It is a break. It is creating a line break right there, as you can see. So the HTML can be nested inside. And of course, if we wanted to use pipes without making tables, you can put escapes. Then you could use escapes so that rather than being put on the same line, the things are put on different lines, etc. Now, where the one thing that I would say is not so intuitive about Markdown, because most of these things, I think, they're things that you do already. Like you may already make checkboxes like this when you're writing plain text notes somewhere. This is something that Markdown was not invented for people to be able to learn something new. Markdown was invented to copy what people were already doing, which is why it's so familiar. One thing that breaks that mold, however, is the way that links and images work. In the base case, what I'd recommend is that whenever you have a link, it needs to start with the https:// not just example.com, but it needs to contain that in front of it. And I recommend that you always put a bracket on either side of it, because a bracket is not a valid character in a URL, and there are times when it could be ambiguous. For example, it is valid to have a period in a URL, so there are times when you might do something like this. Let's say we have example.com. This isn't going to look right, but it is a valid URL to have a period at the end. So if it's part of the URL and you put the brackets around it, no characters will ever be mistaken as non-URL characters. It will always be recognized correctly, which is why I recommend using that. However, if you just put the link and don't do anything else, it will work correctly. If you want to give a link a name, like what you can see here, the best way to do it is using this bracket syntax where you put some brackets and the name, and then you put some brackets and the link's name. And then elsewhere, you go and put the link's name in brackets, a colon, and then the link. And the reason that I suggest doing this, there are shorter ways of doing this, as you can see here. But the reason I suggest doing it this way is that oftentimes links are very long, and it can make your documentation, when you're viewing it just as raw, plain text markdown, it can make it look kind of ugly or out of place. So I'll give you an example of this. Let me go back to, I'm going to go back for a second. This table right here. We're going to look at the source of this. This is what the table looks like. Very simple, very easy to read. We didn't go over what an image link looks like yet, but it's the same as a regular link, except with a bang in front. So that makes it an image. Now, all of the image links I get to put down below. In fact, I could put them all the way at the bottom of the page, and I could put a little comment in front saying appendix, and no one would have to look at it or see it when they're reading the documentation. In fact, I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to go ahead and go down, and I'm going to put a comment. And the way you do a comment in Markdown is you use HTML. So an HTML comment is a bracket, bang, double hyphen. Then you can put in your comment. I'm going to put appendix, links and such. I'm going to paste that down here and update. Now it looks very nice when you're looking at the rendered view, the HTML, the web page view. But it still looks fairly nice when we're looking at it in the plain text view. So this is one of the great benefits of Markdown, is being able, now granted, I'm overusing asterisks and some of those things here for the purpose of example, but one of the great things about Markdown is that it looks fairly natural and digestible in the raw plain text form without being converted into HTML. Let me go back to the page we were looking at just a minute ago, if I can ever get back there. It may be, I may be stuck in a loop here. That's all right. I'll go back this way. Okay. So now that we've gone through the tables, the links, again, there's different styles of links. What I recommend is the same, that you use the same style of image link as for a text link, which is that you use the brackets, the square brackets, to give it the name that you see, to give a nickname to the link itself, and then nickname the link somewhere else, especially if you have multiple links. But the difference with the image is that you just put a bang in front, which I did not give that exact same example here, but that's fine. And then lastly, code blocks. So code blocks allow you, like I said, to specify the language. So you put a triple backticks, you put the language name, and then when it gets converted to HTML, typically the program that is doing the conversion, for example, Discord does a great job of this. Slack, not so much. I think Slack only allows you to put the triple backticks. But Discord will do a great job of this. There are other programs that were in that list I showed earlier that will do a great job of this. Stack Overflow does a great job of this. Many of the sites that you'll use as a software engineer will do a great job. And it will highlight things appropriately according to some rules. There are different color themes that different sites will use, but you get the basic idea here. It'll change the font, it'll change the color, it'll make it easier to read and make it look fairly nice. Now there is one exception that I'd like to point out, which is sometimes when you want to show a block of code, some languages use a triple backtick as a special token. It means something particular. And in those cases, instead of using triple backticks, you can use triple tilde. And the triple tilde does the same function. So what we see here is that I wanted to show a block of Markdown in Markdown. So I use triple tilde and I say MD for Markdown. And then we can see that it has syntax highlighting that's appropriate for Markdown. And it is not rendering the Markdown that is inside. I know that's a little bit confusing, but when you hit the point that you need this, then it won't be. If you ever hit that point, which you probably will. And you can invert these. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about was the nesting. Many of the Markdown elements I'm not sure if I had said this before we had the technical difficulty and the video audio cut out for a minute, but many of the elements in Markdown can be nested, meaning that if you use, generally it's 4 spaces to indent inside, or in the case of a list, I think it's just aligning with what the first character in the list is here. I think that might actually be 3 spaces, which is an oddity, but visually you can see that it's aligned. So here I'm beginning a list, and then inside of the list, I've indented and put a code block, and the code block shows up in the list. And then likewise in this one, I have a block quote and it shows up, and I could put a list inside of a block quote, I believe. I'll test that in just a second. We can even put images and tables in lists. Now, I'm not suggesting that you do this. Try to keep things on the simple side, but there are occasions where it really feels right that a short table belongs in this list or an image belongs in this list. I'll give you an example of where I put images in a list. If we go to my GitHub profile, which is github.com/coolage86, basically I wanted to use the style of an emoji, but with icons that are not in the emoji set, like the Golang gopher, the Node.js hexagon, my own little logo that I have here. So in this list, I was able to put images. All right. Now with that all out of the way, there's 2 more things that we need to do, one of which is I'm going to show you how to use Comrack, and the other is I want to show you the challenge. That's kind of the homework for this. So I'm going to go ahead and open up from here, Beyond Code Markdown Challenge. The challenge is, I've put this in here as an image so that you're not tempted so quickly to cheat and look at how I've done it. But I've put this in here as an image. And the challenge is that once you've completed your notes on Markdown, to go and recreate this page verbatim with every example just as you see here. If you do that, you will have used probably every reasonable bit of Markdown that you will ever need to use. So with that, there's also a Markdown support test that I created. So that, I'm sorry, I probably went a little bit fast on that. So there's a link right here. And remember, this page is in the description. So if you need to get to this page, and it also will be the first comment. So the support test is something where if you want to see what features of Markdown a program supports, so if you want to test out Discord or Slack or Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp, I'm sure WhatsApp supports some of this stuff too, actually. If you want to test any of it, if you copy and paste this whole block into, say, a message to yourself, or tell someone you're going to send them a test message and then try it out, then you will be able to see how much Markdown support it has. If everything renders the same way that it renders with GitHub Pages, so I'll go back here to GitHub Pages. I'll go ahead and just paste this in and update this. And we can see every single thing rendered correctly. Get back nicely formatted HTML. So if you see something that looks relatively close to this, you know that it has full Markdown support. And if you see things that still have brackets or whatnot, you know that it only has partial Markdown support. Now, with that all said, what I want you to do is install Webby real quick, which the instructions for that are on webinstall.dev. So you'll have slightly different instructions between Mac and Windows, just a few characters and a word that are different. But I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I already have it installed, but just to show you, I'm going to copy that. I've got my terminal open. I'm going to paste it. Webby is the safest and fastest way to install developer tools. So if I type Webby Comrack, it'll be there, lickety split. And now it's already installed. Took a little longer than I expected. I thought it would get done within the snap, but maybe because I'm streaming, my internet's a little slower. In any case, we now have the program that is called Comrack that we can use to help us to render Markdown, and I'm going to go to that Markdown support test. I'm going to copy the whole thing, and I am going to create my test.md. I am going to hit the letter A so that I'm in insert mode, and then paste, and then escape, and then :WQ bang to get out of there. Now if I check with cat, I can see that all of my Markdown is there. And now I'm going to use comrack to turn this into HTML. So you remember before, we've used the bracket to be able to create a file from output, like what we did with echo. In this case, if I run comrack, comrack is going to output all of the HTML to the screen, just like echo would if I had typed in something with echo. So instead, I'll forward it to HTML, and then it will create the file test.html. And then if I look inside of that, I can use cat or I can use vim. What you will notice is that there were a couple of things that didn't render quite as we expected. And this is because by default, comrack is a little bit more conservative. It actually isn't as compatible as it could be on purpose. So we're going to go back to the web install.dev, and there is a cheat sheet for comrack that tells us how to use the settings, how to set the settings for comrack. So I'm just going to go right on down here to where the config file that I want is. So this is one big long echo string, as you can see here, and I'm putting it into a special directory that is for comrack's config. Actually, I don't think I want that one. I'm sorry. The one that I want, it's just this one. It's the simple one. That other one is for a use case that we'll talk about later. So this very simple, what I'm doing is I'm creating a file that has --gfm, which is basically telling it to enable certain features of Markdown. It's called GitHub flavor Markdown, and -- header -IDs, and then 2 single quotes. This telling it not to use prefixes. Not something we need to worry about right now, but just want to let you know what it is. So I've created my config file, and now when I run comrack again, this time if I look at the HTML output, we can see that everything was turned into HTML. There is no Markdown left. Okay, and that big long thing here, this configuration is a special configuration that we'll go into later so that you can have, we'll go into it later. It basically, there's a lot of protections turned on by default so that someone can't run their code on your blog and possibly cause problems for somebody else. And so that configuration is a twiddling of the features on that so that we can include more HTML than would normally be allowed. So with that out of the way, we've gone through the entirety of the Markdown syntax. Now, if you want to look at this interactive tutorial, I highly recommend that you check that out. My highest recommendation is that you do the test of skill. And then there's also this other syntax guide that has some more explanation to it. So if you want to see a look at how somebody else has explained it, you can check there. However, there are some things this person recommends that are not best practice. Primarily, they recommend that you do not use a backslash for separating lines, but rather that you use a double space, and I wholeheartedly disagree with that for reasons that we'll go into later when we talk about prettier encode formatters. So the backslash is the right idea. Forget I said anything about anything else. I'm going to check one last time and see if we've got any comments or questions here. Let's see. I don't see anything in on Facebook. I'm going to go check on YouTube if I can figure out where that was at. Okay. Got a couple thumbs up. Thank you very much. Right. Well, I will be re-uploading this with that obnoxious little bit in the middle cut out. The last thing that I want to say, I have to remind myself to say this because otherwise I forget. If this was helpful for you, please give it a thumbs up. That'd be really appreciated. Share it with someone that you know that is interested in getting into programming, doing web pages, blogging. Make sure that if you want to see the rest of the series where we get to the point where we create a couple of our blog pages on the server that you're subscribed, those links are in the description. And then if you can follow on Twitter as well. So we got YouTube, Facebook, Twitter should all be in the description. And then I also do another channel where every morning I just give some thoughts on some lifestyle things, not as structured as this, normally not as long as this. It's just kind of some shower thoughts about life, the universe, and everything. That channel is called Health, Wealth, Commitment, and links to that are in the description as well. Thank you very much for joining me tonight for Markdown. I hope that you have the best night ever. And with that, adios.